Chari, and today I'm making a positive, uplifting card using some alphabet stamps and some inked die cut pieces. So to start my card, I'm going to make a background, and I'm going to start with a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock, and I've cut that with the largest outside-in rectangle. This is going to be the back panel for my card. I wanted to create a sort of cloudy sky, but I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to be very light and subtle. So I'm going to make a cloudy background using the cloudy stencil. I'm using some pumice stone distress ink and a blending brush. And you can see I've got a scrap piece of paper there. And as I ink on my brush, I'm just going to tap it onto that scrap piece of paper. And this will get the initial ink off the brush, so I just have a little bit on there. And I can keep this ink blending nice and light. For each layer of this cloudy sky, I'm going to take that stencil and shift it down, and I'm going to turn it to where I get a different cloud design on each line. This stencil has 4 sides, so you have 4 choices, and if you flip it over, you get even more. The other tip that I try to implement when I'm doing clouds like this is when the clouds kind of go up like a hill, I try to find a place on the next line where they dip down like a valley and put those two areas together. So there's a lot of ups and downs, and it breaks up the lines of the clouds a little bit more and makes them look nice and puffy. So once I've got that last line of clouds, I'm just going to take the ink and the brush and I'm going to ink the bottom. So this will cut down the white and make it match the other layers, but I don't need the stencil to do this. And finally on this panel, I'm just going to go around all the edges with that brush and ink them up to define that edge a little bit and kind of frame this background that I've created. Next, I'm going to create a few little splatters in the background to give it a little more texture. And I'm also using the pumice stone, but this time I'm using the oxide version. I tested this before and the oxide really gave me the look that I wanted. The regular distress ink of the pumice stone when I did this was a little darker than I wanted, but the oxide has that nice chalky pigmenty finish. So I'm just adding some water with my paintbrush to what I've smushed onto my craft sheet here. I'm just going to pick some up and I'm just going to tap my paintbrush and add a little splatter. I really like the look that these little splatters give, especially being the same color as the ink blending, so they're very subtle and they kind of stay in the background and they don't stand out too much. So now that I've got that done on this background, I'm just going to set it aside and let those little splatters dry. Then I'm going to move on to my little watercolor pieces here. So I've got distress inks and I've got a piece of watercolor paper. I'm just smushing those inks onto the craft mat and adding some water, and then I'm just going to pick it up with the paper. I'm going to be drying the layers between each one that I pick up, so you can see I've got my heat tool going there. And if you dry them and then pick up more, it'll make those nice splotches of color on the background. So instead of just having one watercolored background, you get those variations in the color and the different texture. So then the first one I used there was Scattered Straw. This second color is Mustard Seed. So I started with my light one and I'm moving towards my dark one. Mustard Seed's kind of in the middle, but you can see it made it nice and bright. And then finally I'll move on to Wild Honey. So with the Wild Honey, I'm picking up some of those smaller little droplets of water, and you can see how they're nice and dark. And if that's too dark, you can just add some clean water to it. You can see I sprayed it there with the spray bottle and just kind of blend those out. Next, I'm going to work on the umbrella, and I've actually already die cut this piece. So you're going to see how the ink sort of goes into those stitching details on the watercolor paper, which is kind of nice. Again, I'm going to start with my lightest color, which is tumbled glass, and I'm going to be drying it between each layer that I pick up. Next, I'm going to move on to Evergreen Bough, which is kind of a muted green blue color. But you can see it's kind of creating a nice base for these colors. And then finally, I'm going to move on to Peacock Feathers, and that's going to be my final color. I'm trying to pick up those little splatters again so I get more texture in this umbrella. So once I get this looking like I want it, I'll just make sure it's nice and dry, and I'll set that aside. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut the sun. Now part of the reason I didn't die cut this earlier is because I was afraid it would get a little too saturated with water and those rays might fall off. So that's the only reason I did not die cut the sun first before inking it. I've got some liquid stardust here. I'm just going to squirt a little bit onto my craft mat. I'm going to add some water and I'm going to add some sparkly splatters to these two pieces. So I'm just picking up some water with my paintbrush, adding it to that droplet of stardust that I put there. I'm going to splatter the umbrella by tapping my paintbrush, which is a little hard to see on screen here, but I'll show you that shimmer in just a little bit. You can kind of see it in the light. And then for the sun, what I decided to do instead of splatter it is just pick up some and quickly run it across the rays. So just give those sun rays a little bit of sparkle. Now I'm going to assemble the rest of my umbrella. So I've cut out the pieces that go with the umbrella from some storm cloud and some narwhal cardstock. I'm just going to attach these pieces with some liquid glue. And a little bit of glue at that T shape at the top of the handle is what goes behind the umbrella canopy. Next, I'm going to cut off a couple of the rays of the sun, which I know may seem a little bit strange, but it's actually where my sentiment is going to tuck into this little scene that I'm creating here with the sun and the umbrella. Next, I'm going to work on the sentiment, and I'm using two different alphabet stamp sets for this card. I'm starting with Riley's ABCs, and I've spelled out the word sunshine, and I've chosen to stamp that in some carrot ink so that it kind of matches the colors of the sunshine that I inked up earlier. You can see how that tucks in there where I cut those rays off. For the smaller words, I'm using Harold's ABCs, and I'm stamping that in some narwhal ink, so it kind of matches my background clouds a little bit with that gray color. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere down the sun because I know exactly where it needs to be now that I've stamped my sentiment that's going to fit right in there. And then to work on the rest of the sentiment, I'm using Harold's ABCs again and narwhal ink to stamp out When Skies Are. And then finally, I'm going to use Riley's ABCs to spell out the word gray and stamp that in some peacock ink. So now I'm going to go ahead and glue that panel down to a white card base. So I'm using some strong adhesive here. And it's going to have a nice thin white border all the way around it, which is going to make that gray that we inked on the background pop a little bit more. Finally, I've added some foam squares to the back of that umbrella, and I'm just going to put it on this background, popping it up with some dimension. I really love how this card turned out and how the sentiment tucks in with all those die cuts. I like the mixing of the fonts as well as the ink colors, and I really love that cloudy, subtle background that I created. So I hope that this card and this video will inspire you to keep using your alphabet stamps, make some custom sentiments, and also get a little inky with your die cuts. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.